So, in our third big topic this week, we saw earnings calls for quarterly earnings come from Apple, Alphabet, Google's parent company, Microsoft, and Meta. And they all had a significant AI component. So, first up, Apple CEO Tim Cook confirmed that generative AI features are coming to Apple software, quote, later this year. While he refused to reveal more details at the moment, many people believe this is a likely signal that Apple is making a very big move into AI. Second, Alphabet slash Google talked a ton about AI agents. CEO Sundar Pichai said that Google Assistant would, quote, act more like an agent over time. And by agent, we mean an autonomous AI assistant that can do things for you. And the company actually also refers to Duet AI, which works in docs, sheets, et cetera, kind of as an AI assistant. They already call that an agent in some of their public facing comments. Not to mention the information previously reported that Google is working on an agent called Pixie for its Pixel phone. Microsoft also showed very solid earnings with revenue from the quarter growing moderately faster year over year. And interestingly, 6 percentage points of growth in its Azure cloud business also came from demand for AI services. CEO Satya Nadella gave a shout out to Microsoft's, quote, small language models, which it's rolling out. And these are less costly AI models for their customers. And users of the company's GitHub Copilot AI assistant for coding are also up to 1.3 million users from 1 million in October of 2023. Last but certainly not least, on Meta's earning call, Mark Zuckerberg talked about the company's vision to build full general intelligence. Specifically, he said, quote, previously, I thought that because many of the tools were social commerce or maybe media oriented, that it might be possible to deliver these products by solving only a subset of AI's challenges. But now it's clear that we're going to need our models to be able to reason, plan, code, remember, and many other cognitive capabilities in order to provide the best versions of the services that we envision. So, Paul, I want to start with Apple. Can you unpack the significance of Tim Cook's comments during Apple's earnings call? While he was short on details, the company does not talk about AI explicitly too often in these types of settings.
I think we maybe mentioned this on the podcast last week. Yeah, they, for whatever reason, just avoid the term altogether. Like even in their own messaging, they'll talk about it like machine learning in some ways within like their chips and stuff like that. But they just don't talk about the technology as AI, even though the iPhone has been infused with it for like 10 years.
Mm.
Just a decision they make. So I always wondered like when the pressure was going to hit them to where they have to acknowledge for Wall Street purposes that yes, we actually are building AI and we are a leader in it. And this was the earnings call where it finally came to a head. So yeah, him mentioning AI and specifically generative AI, I think is a very big deal for where Apple goes next. He did, I don't have the exact quote here, but he did say something in the call like, we like to build things, then talk about them, because he was getting pressure. Like, what exactly are you going to do with generative AI? I think there is the obvious thing of Siri has to actually become intelligent, like be functional. I think I've said before, like it has to do something more than weather and reminders. Like 95% of how I use Siri is to set reminders on my phone, like set a reminder for tonight at 6 p.m. to do this thing. I would love to have it actually function for something way more than that. And I do think we are going to get that. The date to watch here, I don't think they've announced the actual day yet, but in June they have their worldwide developers conference. And he alluded to later this year, they would be, announcing things with generative AI. My expectation is June is the date to watch. There will be probably a lot of announcements. And then I would assume what they would do is probably make those announcements available to developers to build on top of. And then I would expect maybe in their like September is usually when they do updated iPhones and things like that. So I would think that maybe by this summer, we'll get a better vision of what they're going to do with AI. And then probably by the fall of this year, we might actually start to see what a next gen operating system looks like, how it's going to be infused into your phone, how Siri becomes smarter. And then I wonder at what point we start to see the vision for what does the iPhone evolve into?
Mm.
Especially with the Vision Pro coming out. We'll talk about that in a couple of minutes in the rapid fire. But I really start to wonder, like, what is the iPhone? How are AI agents going to be infused into this, as you alluded to earlier? What does Siri look like? And I think we're going to get a lot of answers from Apple this year. And it's the one company I just keep waiting for. I mean, Google, I'm extremely interested in what they do and how they evolve. But I think Apple is often just overlooked in this space because they don't tout AI all the time. And so they're kind of forgotten about, but they're a major player.
So speaking of Google, they definitely made some noise about AI agents, kind of combined with what you were talking about related to Bard and Gemini. How do you kind of see their rumblings about AI agents kind of fitting into the overall strategy or vision of that business?
Yeah, so AI agents, if you're new to the show and you haven't really heard us talk about AI agents before, the basic premise here is all of these major AI labs are all trying to build models that can take actions on your behalf. So right now, the language models we have today that are, that we see and experience through ChatGPT and Bard, and Claude, they can't take actions. They can just build lists of things. They can't go and book flights or send your emails for you per se. They can write your emails. Um, and so they're all moving toward a phase where these things can take actions on our behalf. And I think the significance of a Google and or an Apple is you already trust them with all of your data. So we talked, I think I mentioned last week, this Multion is like this
Mm.
AI agent company that I started tracking last week. And to use it, you have to give it access to your browser. Like you install it as a Chrome extension, and then it sees everything you do. And so the question becomes like, well, do I trust this company? Like who is it? Like who started this company? Who's funding it? What government is maybe behind it, or what sovereign wealth fund is like I have no idea. And it might not be any of those things, but I don't know. Google and Apple, if they come to me and say, "Hey, we now have AI agents that can take actions on your behalf," and it's Google, it's like, "Well, you already have everything. You have I use Chrome for everything. Like you already know everything I'm doing." So I am far more likely to experiment with a tool or to adopt a tool that's coming from a major technology company that I already trust with my life. Like they have all of it stored. And so I think for the startup ecosystem, it's not probably great that these companies are moving in that same direction because I think a lot of these companies are just going to get rolled out. Like they're just going to get obsoleted, or maybe they get lucky and get acquired for some talent acquisition. But it's hard to look at things being built in the startup community that Apple and Google and others aren't going to just come out with themselves and obsolete those things. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, and I pulled Reuters just because for context, like one of the ways that we used to look at this stuff. So before everyone was talking about AI, like before ChatGPT, when we were just building the AI Institute and trying to create awareness about this, one of the ways we used to gauge the companies that were serious about it was how many AI machine learning engineers they had on staff. So I would go into Sales Navigator, LinkedIn Sales Navigator, and I would look at and keep track of how many AI engineers were working at these different companies. And the other one was mentions of AI on earnings calls. And prior to ChatGPT, it wasn't very common. So, according to Reuters, and we'll put the link in the show notes, the term AI or artificial intelligence has been uttered on 38% of conference calls held by S&P 500 companies in January. So that was this year for Q4 earnings. A Reuters analyst transcript shows that's up from 34% at the same point during third quarter. But the one I thought was awesome is I looked at what was it last year in January. So January of 2023 was 15%. Now, there's a common mistake people make when calculating percentages. I see this all the time, even in like mainstream media articles. But to go from 15% to 38% is not 23%. So the assumption is 38 minus 15. That's not how it works. They're percentage points. So to increase from 15% to 38% is 153% increase. It's remove the percentage signs. To go from 15 to 38 is 153%. So the mentions of AI on earnings calls in a 12-month period is up 153%. And the leaders for the January calls, Alphabet and Microsoft at 53 and 52 times each. So again, like I think, when we're talking about this topic, part of it might be of interest to you as an investor, like where are the stocks to be thinking about, the companies to be tracking. But just to understand, one of the things I always say when I do my keynotes is there is a necessity for a next gen professional and a next gen leader because the technology companies that power business have bet everything on this. And so when you look at earnings calls and you see the significance of the mentions by their CEOs and CFOs, it is all of they're thinking about. And so what has to happen is this technology that they're building, AI agents and intelligent virtual assistants and all these things, it will get diffused into society and into businesses. And so you as a business leader or a practitioner, marketer, whatever you do in your career, the opportunity for you is to be the one to figure this out. It's not going anywhere. Like it's only going to increase the amount of times they're talking about it and the amount of products they're rolling out and how quickly those products come. So, I hopefully it's interesting context for people. I personally, no investing advice here. I'm not telling people what stocks to buy. Um, I personally have avoided Meta stock forever. Like I just was not interested in Facebook as a company because I knew that they had one of the leading AI research labs in the world and they didn't seem to care. Like it was just basically being built into their news feed and into other products like Messenger and wherever else they're using it. But it wasn't the focus of Zuckerberg. The metaverse wasn't. I didn't care about the metaverse. I thought it was 10 years off if they were lucky. Um, Once they pivoted and started truly building their messaging around their AI capabilities, that was when I actually said, okay, now this is an interesting company. And so I have personally started taking a much greater interest in Meta as a stock. And the day after their earnings, it jumped 21%. Like Friday morning, I was at this talk and I'm looking, I was like, oh my God, they're up 21%. Now, part of it was because they put out their first dividend, I think, ever. But I think in large part, it's the AI thing. And so I'll read one quick thing and we can get into rapid fire. Um, on the call, Zuckerberg addressed the open source issue. And so we've talked on this podcast many times about closed models like Google and OpenAI, where they're not sharing what they're doing. You can't go build on it like you could an open source model. And then you have the companies like Mixtral and Meta and others that are creating these models and just sharing them so people can build whatever they want on them. And so Zuckerberg addressed this in the earnings call. And so I'll just read this because I think, and again, like we won't unpack this now, maybe we'll come back around to this, but I think it's a really important thing for people to hear because I've wondered this myself sometimes. So he said, I know some people have questions about how we benefit from open sourcing the results of our research and large amounts of compute. So I thought it might be useful to lay out the strategic benefits here. The short version is that open sourcing improves our models, and because there's still significant work to turn our models into products, and because there will be other open source models available anyway, we find there are mostly advantages to being the open source leader, and it doesn't remove differentiation from our products much anyway. Then he gets into specific strategic benefits. First, open source software is typically safer and more secure. That is one opinion. Like there are people who do not agree with what he's saying here. That is typically safer and more secure, as well as more compute efficient to operate due to ongoing feedback, scrutiny, and development. Big deal, blah, blah, blah. Efficiency improvements and lowering compute costs also benefit everyone, including us. Second, open source software often becomes an industry standard, like a Linux is kind of what they're thinking about here. And when companies standardize on building with our stack, then becomes easier to integrate new innovations into our products. And then third, open source is hugely popular with developers and researchers. We know that people want to work on open systems that will be widely adopted, so it helps them with recruiting, and talent and things like that. So, I think, again, topic for another time, but there's always this debate of, well, isn't open source just going to give everyone, including bad actors, the power to do all these things? Yes, it will, actually. And I tell you, like, after just spending time with a bunch of attorneys for a couple of days, I got asked this question like a dozen times about like the dangers of open sourcing. So I don't know, fascinating thread to pull on in a future topic, but that is why Meta's doing it. It was the first time I think he's given like a super clear answer of why they see the value.